This is the counterpoint to getting the young guys to tell us about starting the practice. This is like older guys looking back and giving you a little reflection on why we chose a particular career. So I'm going to just start it off with a Privademic career, kind of a private practice, but maintaining some academics. And my story is right after a fellowship, I moved to Southern California, but I did a fellowship with Henry Bowman. And at the time, he was one of the few people talking about doing big late anterior decompressions for spinal cord, for incomplete cord injury and getting recovery, which was counter to what was in textbooks at the time. So he was also a pioneer who took some arrows. But here I was doing all these huge cases, thoracotomies and big retroperitoneal approaches, and I missed that. So when I went to Southern California, I negotiated with the practice I joined to let me go to Rancho a couple of half days a week, and I stayed there. Rancho was a pretty busy civilian spinal cord injury center in its day, and saw about 300 new spinal cord injuries a year. So I got to do those kind of cases, but then unfortunately I had to go back in the afternoon and see patients till 8 or 9 o'clock at night to keep my private practice happy. But I worked my way up and ultimately became chief of the spinal injury service there, and I did that for 15 years of spending 2 days a week, one day rounding and the other day doing these really big surgeries, and then going back into my private practice life. And the reason I did it is I always enjoyed teaching as a resident and a fellow. I like doing that big surgery, and that's not stuff that walks into your office when you're in a suburban private practice. I would have had to kind of give that stuff up. Ultimately, I got to enjoy making presentations and writing papers about spinal trauma and spinal cord injury, and when I moved to Texas, more about degenerative disease, and then I happened to be in the right place at the right time as arthroplasty came in. I kind of gotten into that groove in spinal trauma, then shifted gears when I moved to Texas. And it gave me opportunities to participate in international organizations at various levels. So, you start out just volunteering to work on committees, and you do a good job and show up all the time, and eventually you get elected chairman of that committee, and you show up and you do a good job, and ultimately the chairman sometimes gets invited to be on the board of directors, and I was on the board of these organizations, and again, do a good job as a board member and participate and keep showing up, and I was able to serve as president of 2 international spine societies. So you just have to get in the groove, you have to be dedicated, you have to want it, but this is one of the places where if you're persistent, you'll move up because there aren't a lot of people to do it. So, what did it cost me over my career? Money and time, but fortunately not my family. I've seen, overdoing it burn up other people's families along the way, and it's sometimes not pretty. And you have to decide on a balance in money. I mean, when you get into private practice, as John Burleson said, his first check was like more than he made in his entire residency. So it's easy to get overwhelmed, but you just have to decide whether that's your primary goal in life or whether you can make a good living but still have time for other opportunities. And time is the tough one because, as John said, you got a family to raise, you got obligations, you want to build your practice, and now you got to carve out time to do all these other things. And you have to find the balance. You got to and make time where there was no time. So for me, I just decided to get up early. So I did a lot of papers and editing and stuff between 6 and 8 in the morning on Saturdays and Sundays before my kids got up, and I made it my practice for all the years in practice until things slowed down. I was always at my desk at 6 a.m. and I got a lot done between 6 and 7 because nobody was there, and even between 7 and 8 as people started to file in. That was still my time. I got to do a lot of independent stuff, and you just have to give up a couple hours sleep to get it done. And no regrets. But you got to make that decision early. I'm kind of convinced it's really hard to jump into that if you haven't been doing it from the beginning, because, we hear this a lot. We talk to guys who are finishing their fellowship, and they go, yeah, I really want to get involved in that stuff, but, I'm going to dedicate the next couple of years to building my practice, or I got to, worry about my boards. And then a couple of years later, you run into them and say, do you want to be on a committee or something? I can get you on a committee at these different organizations. And they go, I'm just too busy. I just don't have the time for that. So you got to just decide now that this is going to be something you want to do and figure out how to do it. But it's not something you can put off because it is that block block of time has just no price on it. So, it was tougher then because although there were just a few limited spine journals, there was no EMR, there was no electronics. So when you were interested, you had to go to the library and actually find volumes and Xerox them and staple them together and read them and highlight them and, stack them up and then, write your stuff. And the biggest pain in the neck was doing your bibliography because you forgot to put one article and it knocked everything off. So things are a little bit easier now because it's all electronic and you can keep it on your desktop and do it that way. But there's a lot more knowledge that you have to assimilate. So it's the good and the bad. But why do I recommend doing this instead of just cranking out RVUs and making more money? You get into, if you participate in clinical trials, you get access to something that is not going to hit the market, for lots of years. So it's access for you to see some neat new technology. It's like disc replacement, but it's also really nice to patients because patients had access to this who couldn't otherwise afford it. Just normal people who didn't have to make a 20% deductible on an expensive surgery, they were happy to do it, but otherwise people who, couldn't afford surgery, couldn't afford to go to Europe to get a disc replacement had an opportunity to get it. So we were able to help a lot of our patients. But, more importantly, you're playing a role in the development and evaluation of new things. You are going to make friends with similar like-minded surgeons who are also interested in new advances and in taking care of patients and maybe publishing and presenting. It keeps you different from everybody else in private practice. It's a community differentiator, and you remain fresh. I mean, that's just as Dr. Chapman will tell you why he likes academics is it keeps him on his toes and keeps him young because, you guys keep asking him good questions. So, you can make an impact different from everybody else who's just out there trying to see as many patients as they can. It's really important that clinical physicians, and Lisa Ferrara referred to this a few times, the clinical people who see a lot of volume and really understand it and are working in the trenches, they need to participate with innovation. They got to participate with industry. They got to participate with independent engineers because they know what the challenges are. They know that something that's handed to them is never going to work down in a deep belly. They're the ones who have to tell that to the people. So I remember like this device, some engineer thought this was the neatest thing because it could change the height and the lordosis and the thing, and everything was like built into this knuckle, and he like brought me a sawbones and this big thing, and what are you, nuts? There's like no way you could put this in, through the incisions we use for anterior cervical surgery. So, this is not the only example. So a lot of times you just, you have to be there. And actually the most fun we've had is working with small companies where the engineers came in the OR, saw us struggling, and showed up the next week with an adapted instrument that we struggled a lot less with and move things along. So, you can really participate. So, how do you start? Tell your mentors now that you're interested in doing that. Get some advice from the research staff as to how you start out. You have to learn about the compliance regulations with FDAs through your IRBs, and it's just part of it. Start with your own data. Get a database started on every operation you do and start tracking them prospectively. It's a lot easier than trying to pull them up retrospectively. Track all your complications and all the things that you might want to write a paper about, and present yours at local spine meetings, at hospital medical staff meetings. Just get used to showing your data, and then maybe somebody else will say, hey, I got a buddy who's doing the same thing on the same operation, and maybe you can put your series together. Start slow and build your traction, but you got to start with being willing to do the work. Nobody's going to be there to put a medal on your chest if you haven't done the work yet. So start, network, and I think it's a good way to participate while still being in private practice. You can still participate in education. Be aware of pseudo research and understand it's okay to say no. The pearls in life are don't get involved with people you don't like, and don't get involved in studies you don't like, particularly if it smells a little bit funny. If it smells funny, it probably is funny. Things like, we'll pay you for sitting or having dinner once a month and tell us about your cases, or, we'll pay you to fill out a form every time you do the surgery, but it's really important this is research, and, if it doesn't sound right, it's not right. So, people are making decisions for us, and they're telling us what we can and cannot do to patients, which hurts our patients, and that's, what we're agonizing over with disc replacement. We've got all this great data, and patients are sitting there. I know what their problem is. I know how to make them better, and I can't get to them, because people that we're showing all this data to aren't interested, and they're the ones who are making medical policy. And it's bad for all of us. It's bad for patients, it's bad for doctors, it's bad for industry. And the only way we can really fight back is doing what we're doing. I mean, there are political ways and other ways to do it, but by participating in clinical research, we are building a database that people can't argue against. So that's my plea for Privademics, and I'm going to